So welcome to one of my favourite rooms here at Newstead Abbey. It's called the Japanese Room, and it was actually designed by the Webbs, who lived here a couple of decades after Byron. But it's so beautiful that I wanted to share it with you. Now, today's object is the final one in our Object of the Month series. It's been a real pleasure for me to share more about Byron's life through some of the amazing artefacts that we have here in the Newstead archives. But I wanted to save one of the best, or at least one of the most dramatic, for last. So today's object is one of the helmets that Byron commissioned from Giacomo Aspe in Genoa in 1823. It was made to Byron's own designs of black leather with elaborate metalwork, including his crest here and these elaborate earpieces. And also, of course, it has this majestic black plume. Now, Byron commissioned 3 helmets at the same time, not all for him. One was for his de facto brother-in-law, Pietro Gamba, and the other for his friend Edward Trelawney, as they were all going together to join the Greek fight for independence, or to support it. Now, Byron's love affair with Greece began as a boy, when he was reading ancient Greek classics and writers like Homer, whose description of Hector's helmet in the Iliad actually inspired the design for this helmet. His love solidified when he was travelling there as a young man, and he actually spent quite a lot of time in Greece, although he had some conflicted feelings about the land and its people. He saw it as an incredibly beautiful country that had a rich and a glorious past, but he saw its current citizens as not living up to that past and not living up to their ancestors. He believed that they had lost their love of freedom, and he saw them often as cowering minions of an oppressive Turkish state. It's actually quite a common theme in some of his early poetry. For example, in the Jawa from 1813, where he writes, "Clime of the unforgotten brave, whose land, from plain to mountain cave, was freedom's home or glory's grave. Shrine of the mighty, can it be that this is all that remains of thee?" Byron's critiques, though, faded away when he heard about the Greek fight for independence in the 1820s. He saw this as fulfilling Greece's potential, and perhaps returning it to the glories, liberties, rights, and freedoms of old. He was eager to support the fight, and also to enter into a more heroic, active, and glorious life himself. When he was a young boy, really, a teenager, he'd written about how the glorious, to him, deeds of his ancestors inspired him. And on leaving Newstead Abbey, he writes, "Far distant he goes, with the same emulation, the fame of his fathers he ne'er can forget." However, as life had continued, he'd come to see himself as not able to live up to those active ancestors that he venerated. In a poem in 1811, for example, he writes, "Theirs was the wealth and the fullness of fame, and mine to inherit too haughty a name. Theirs were the times and the triumphs of yore, mine to regret, but renew them no more." Even when he became famous, a glory of its own, he had a very conflicted relationship with himself as a writer, particularly during periods of depression. In his journal of 1813, he writes, "I do think that the preference for writers to agents and the mighty stir made about scribbling and scribes by themselves and others is a sign of effeminacy, degeneracy, and weakness." Quite harsh, especially when you think he's talking about himself. In 1822, he was growing restless with his life in Italy, where he was a writer and a sasibo to his lover, Teresa Guiccioli. He wanted to make a more active mark. He'd thought about going to North America, to South America, and also to Greece, and he finally decided for Greece in 1823. He was visited by Edward Blackyer, who was on his way to Greece to report back to England about the state of Greece. Specifically, he was reporting back to the London Greek Committee, and they asked Byron to become a member, to act as a representative or liaison, and also to support the Greek fight for independence. And this is something that he did, with his image and his name, but also more practically with money, a lot of money, with supplies, with troops, and also with time, a lot of which was spent trying to help mediate between rival Greek factions. Now, Byron arrived in Missolonghi, Greece, where he would later die, in January of 1824. And in the pictures of that arrival, he's often depicted as wearing this helmet, but there's actually very little evidence to show that he ever wore it. There's often been questions about why Byron had a helmet like this commissioned. It certainly wasn't practical. Was it hubris? Was it play acting? Was it the self-dramatization and self-romanticization that we're so used to with Byron? Was it, slightly more positively, an attempt to make himself into a symbol or a figurehead, to make the cause of Greece more visible, more popular, perhaps to unite it? Was it an attempt to revive those ancient days and to tie himself to some of those active, heroic figures that he so admired? Or was it an attempt to symbolize that connection between the modern Greek fight for independence and the ancient Greece that Byron viewed as the bastion of liberty and of martial political and cultural greatness? There are so many options, and I can't go through them all. I just keep listing forever. But what do you think? One of the interesting things about the helmet is the fact that it has his motto written on the front, Crede Byron, or believe in Byron. And a part of me thinks that this helmet and the motto on it are about Byron believing in himself and in the active, heroic figure that he wanted to be. This helmet tells us about Byron's self-creation, but also about the last months of his life, about his arrival in Greece, his attempt to support the Greek fight for independence, and ultimately his death in April 1824 of a fever in Missolonghi, Greece, at which point this helmet, along with a sword and a laurel wreath, were placed on top of a hastily constructed wooden coffin before his body began its eventual journey back home through Nottingham and to Hucknall churchyard. Thank you for joining me today for this last object. I hope that you've enjoyed our explorations as much as me, and all that's left to say is goodbye.